Imagine being one of the most respected judges in America, someone who has built her entire career on dispensing justice, on seeing through lies, on protecting the innocent. Now imagine that same person being accused of something so deeply personal, so utterly devastating, that it shakes the very foundation of who she is. 5 wealthy women came forward with a shocking allegation against Judge Judy. They claimed she had deliberately stolen her ex-husband's affection, that she had manipulated him, that she had turned him against them through calculated schemes and cunning tactics. These weren't random accusations whispered in coffee shops. These were public statements made by influential women with credentials, with money, with lawyers, and with what appeared to be irrefutable proof. They went on record saying that Judge Judy had weaponized her charm, her intellect, and her judicial authority to keep a man who rightfully should have moved on. The narrative spread like wildfire across social media, across gossip columns, across the very platforms that Judge Judy herself had used to build her empire. But here's where the story takes a turn nobody expected. Nobody saw it coming because nobody was looking in the right direction. What if everything these wealthy women claimed was built on a foundation of lies? What if the real story was so different, so dramatically opposed to what everyone believed, that it would completely invert our understanding of who the victim actually was? What if the evidence that was supposed to destroy Judge Judy's reputation was actually the key to exposing the truth about these accusers? Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. That's exactly what happened when her ex-husband walked into the spotlight with evidence nobody was prepared for. His testimony didn't just contradict their claims. It obliterated them. It revealed a side of the story that had been deliberately hidden, manipulated, and distorted by people who had everything to gain from Judge Judy's downfall and everything to lose from the truth. The moment he stepped forward with documentation, with text messages, with witnesses, with a timeline that proved everything the wealthy women had said was false, the entire narrative collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. But what makes this story truly remarkable isn't just the vindication. It's what it reveals about how easily the public can be manipulated, how quickly we believe accusations against someone we think we know, and how a carefully constructed lie can nearly destroy the reputation of someone who spent her entire life fighting for the truth. This is the kind of story that has everything: betrayal, deception, wealth, power, false accusations, a dramatic revelation that changes everything. And most importantly, an underdog who refused to back down, who stood firm in her truth even when the world turned against her, even when powerful people with resources and credibility tried to tear her down. Judge Judy wasn't some villain twirling her mustache in the shadows. She was a target. She was someone who was blamed for something she didn't do, attacked by people with motive, and forced to defend herself against allegations that seemed impossible to overcome. Yet somehow, through it all, the truth emerged. Before we dive into this incredible story and uncover exactly what these wealthy women claimed and what the ex-husband revealed, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. This story has so many layers, so many shocking details that you absolutely need to see unfold. Drop a comment down below and tell me what you think really happened. Do you think Judge Judy was treated fairly? Do you believe these women set out to destroy her intentionally? Trust me when I say this story has twists you won't see coming, revelations that will make you question everything you thought you knew about power, privilege, and the weaponization of false accusations in the age of social media. Stick with me because the truth is far stranger and far more compelling than the lies that tried to bury it. To understand how this story unfolded, we need to first understand Judge Judy herself. She is not just a television personality or a judicial figure. She is an institution, a woman who for decades has commanded respect in courtrooms and living rooms across America. Her presence carries weight. When she speaks, people listen. When she judges, people believe in her judgment. This is because Judge Judy has built her entire brand on one fundamental principle: the pursuit of truth. She sees through deception like a knife through butter. She has an uncanny ability to detect when someone is lying, to spot inconsistencies in stories, to read the smallest shifts in body language and tone that reveal what a person is really thinking. For years, this has been her superpower. It has made her untouchable. It has made her legendary. But it also made her a target. Judge Judy's personal life has always been kept relatively private, a careful boundary between her professional world and her private world. Her ex-husband, a successful businessman with connections in multiple industries, had moved on years ago. Or so everyone thought. They had maintained a cordial relationship, the kind that exists between two people who shared history but had moved forward with their lives. There were no dramatic custody battles, no bitter legal wars, no public feuds. Everything seemed normal, settled, peaceful. Judge Judy had her career, her influence, her legacy. He had his business interests and his life. They existed in separate spheres, occasionally crossing paths at events or through mutual acquaintances, but fundamentally living independent lives. This backdrop is crucial to understanding what happened next because it sets the stage for just how shocking the accusations would become. Enter the 5 wealthy women. These were not ordinary accusers. They came from privilege, from old money, from families with names that carried weight in social circles. They had attended the best schools, lived in the best neighborhoods, had access to the best lawyers and publicists. On the surface, they appeared credible. They appeared composed. They appeared like victims. Each of them had their own story, their own narrative about how Judge Judy had interfered in their lives. But their stories shared a common thread. Judge Judy had deliberately kept her ex-husband emotionally unavailable to them. She had supposedly used her influence, her charm, and her power to maintain control over him. Some claimed she had turned him against them, poisoning him with negative information about who they were and what they wanted from him. Others suggested she had created scenarios designed to make him doubt their intentions. A few went so far as to insinuate that her motivation was jealousy, that she couldn't bear the thought of him moving on and finding happiness with someone else. These allegations were presented with such confidence, such apparent sincerity, that they gained traction immediately. The women went on talk shows. They did interviews with major media outlets. They posted carefully crafted statements on social media platforms where millions of followers could see them. They hired publicists who knew exactly how to frame their narrative in the most sympathetic way possible. They presented themselves as victims of manipulation by a powerful woman who had used her public platform and her judicial authority to control a man's personal relationships. And the public, the media, and even some of Judge Judy's closest associates began to believe them. The narrative became so dominant, so pervasive, that it seemed almost indisputable. Judge Judy's reputation, built over decades of careful work and authentic service, suddenly found itself under siege. The damage was real and it was visible. Sponsors who had worked with Judge Judy for years started to distance themselves. Media outlets that had always been friendly began to ask harder questions. Social media, that powerful and unforgiving megaphone, turned into a weapon. Comments flooded in from people who felt betrayed, who thought they had misjudged her all along, who now saw her in a completely different light. The narrative had shifted so dramatically that Judge Judy herself became the villain in the story. She became the powerful woman who controlled others. She became the judge who abused her authority. She became the manipulator who played games with people's lives. The irony was almost unbearable. A woman who had spent her entire career exposing lies and protecting the innocent was now being painted as someone who weaponized deception. But here's the thing about Judge Judy that these women may have underestimated. She doesn't back down. She doesn't hide. She doesn't run from confrontation or difficulty. Throughout her career, she has faced countless opponents, countless challengers, countless people who tried to deceive her or manipulate her. And every single time, she has stood her ground. She has demanded truth. She has insisted on evidence. She has refused to accept narratives that didn't align with facts. When these accusations came, Judge Judy didn't crumble. She didn't retreat into silence or hire a team of public relations experts to manage the narrative in the way that her accusers had done. Instead, she did something far more powerful. She prepared herself for the moment when the truth would finally come out. Her ex-husband watched everything unfold with growing concern. He saw the lies being spread. He saw the narrative being constructed piece by piece. He saw the woman he had once been married to being systematically destroyed by accusations that had no basis in reality. He knew the truth because he had lived it. He knew exactly what had happened, what hadn't happened, and what these women's true motivations were. And he realized that he had a choice to make. He could stay silent and watch an innocent person be destroyed. Or he could step forward and tell the truth, consequences be damned. What he decided to do would change everything. It would expose not just a lie, but a conspiracy. It would reveal that these wealthy women had coordinated their stories, that they had prepared their accusations with calculated precision, and that their real motivation had nothing to do with Judge Judy at all. The first accusation came on a Monday morning in October, delivered through a carefully orchestrated press conference in Manhattan. One of the 5 women, a socialite named Victoria with connections to old money and even older scandals, stood before a microphone with her lawyer at her side and told her story to a room full of journalists. She spoke about how Judge Judy had interfered in her relationship with the ex-husband, how she had been led to believe there was potential for something real, only to have it sabotaged from behind the scenes. She described moments where she felt Judge Judy's invisible hand steering events, where she sensed manipulation disguised as coincidence. Her voice wavered at precisely the right moments. Her eyes glistened with what appeared to be genuine pain. The journalists ate it up. Within hours, the story had spread across every major news outlet in the country. By evening, it was trending on social media. By the next morning, 4 other women had come forward with similar stories. Each of these women had their own platform, their own audience, their own ability to amplify the narrative. They went on podcast interviews where they spoke in hushed, confidential tones about their experiences. They posted Instagram stories with cryptic messages and carefully chosen photos that seemed to corroborate their claims without explicitly stating them. One woman released a thinly veiled memoir chapter that detailed her emotional journey with a man who was clearly meant to be Judge Judy's ex-husband, painting Judge Judy as a puppet master pulling invisible strings. Another did a tell-all interview on a major late-night talk show, speaking about the psychological impact of being rejected by someone she had fallen for, carefully directing blame toward Judge Judy rather than accepting any personal responsibility. The coordination was almost invisible, but if you looked closely, you could see it. The timing of each accusation, the similar language used across different platforms, the way they built on each other's narratives to create a unified story of victimhood and manipulation. The media machine shifted into overdrive. Cable news networks dedicated entire segments to analyzing the accusations. Legal experts were brought on to discuss whether Judge Judy could face any formal charges or professional consequences. Journalists began digging into her past, looking for any incident that could be reframed as evidence of a pattern of behavior. Her decades of respected work were suddenly being re-examined through a hostile lens. Every decision she had made, every person she had crossed in her career, was now being scrutinized for signs that she was capable of the manipulation being accused of. The narrative became inescapable. It dominated conversations. It shaped perceptions. It created a reality that seemed impossible to challenge because the accusers had already controlled the story from the very beginning. Judge Judy's response was measured and professional. She released a statement through her legal team denying the allegations and asserting that she had never interfered in her ex-husband's personal relationships. She claimed that the accusations were false and that she welcomed an investigation into the matter. But here's the problem with truth in the age of social media and viral narratives. A carefully crafted denial doesn't trend the way a juicy accusation does. A lawyer's measured statement doesn't create emotional engagement the way a tearful confession on a talk show does. Judge Judy's response was appropriate and dignified, but it was fighting against a tide that had already been set in motion. The women's accusations had momentum. They had emotion. They had the appearance of credibility. Judge Judy's denial, by contrast, seemed cold, defensive, and suspiciously lawyered. The damage extended far beyond social media discourse. Professional organizations began receiving complaints. Television networks that aired her show started to feel pressure from advertisers and advocacy groups. Colleagues and friends who had stood by her for years began to distance themselves, not because they believed the accusations, but because they didn't want to be associated with someone so publicly embattled. The court of public opinion had rendered its verdict, and it seemed almost impossible to appeal. Every day brought new headlines. Every news cycle brought new complications. The accusers appeared confident, unified, and most importantly, they appeared consistent. Their stories supported each other. Their timelines aligned. Their descriptions of Judge Judy's behavior matched in ways that seemed too perfect to be coincidence, though interestingly, nobody seemed to question whether that perfection itself was suspicious. What made this moment particularly devastating was that Judge Judy had built her entire reputation on being able to see through deception. She had spent decades in courtrooms exposing lies, holding liars accountable, protecting people from manipulation. Now she found herself in the position of being accused of the very thing she had dedicated her career to fighting against. The irony was almost cruel. Here was a woman who could spot a false claim from across a room, who had trained her eye to detect inconsistencies and contradictions, and she was being attacked by narratives that her accusers had carefully constructed with all the polish and precision of a Hollywood production. The question that hung in the air was whether the truth would ever be able to catch up to the lie, or whether the damage was already done and irreversible. 3 weeks into the media frenzy, Judge Judy found herself facing a moment she had never anticipated in her entire career. A major television network had arranged for her to appear on their flagship news program to address the accusations directly. The network promised her a fair hearing, an opportunity to tell her side of the story to millions of viewers simultaneously. Her legal team debated whether this was a good idea. Some advised against it, worried that any live television appearance could be used against her, that words could be twisted, that the narrative was too entrenched to reverse. But Judge Judy insisted. She had spent her entire life believing in the power of truth spoken plainly and directly. She had built her reputation on that belief. She would not start backing away from it now, regardless of the consequences. The night before the interview, she sat in her home going over notes, preparing for questions she knew would come. She anticipated the accusations. She had documentation ready, a careful timeline of events, text messages that proved her innocence, witness statements from people who knew the truth. She was ready. Or at least she thought she was. She didn't anticipate how the interview would actually unfold, how the interviewer would approach the topic, how the narrative would be framed before she even had a chance to respond. The morning of the broadcast arrived with gray skies and the kind of tension that fills the air before a storm. Judge Judy sat in the green room, watching monitors as the morning show began its normal routine. News updates. Weather forecasts. Celebrity gossip. All the standard content that fills morning television. Then came the transition. The host, a seasoned journalist with a reputation for tough questioning, turned to the camera with a serious expression and began laying out the accusations for the audience. He described the women's claims in meticulous detail, allowing each accusation to land before moving to the next. He showed clips of their interviews. He quoted their most damaging statements. He painted a picture where Judge Judy emerged as a jealous, controlling woman who couldn't let go of her ex-husband. By the time Judge Judy walked onto the set to take her seat across from the host, the narrative had already been established. The audience had already heard the worst version of the story. The host greeted her with professional courtesy, but there was an edge to it, a thinness that suggested the questions would be sharper than expected. Judge Judy settled into her chair with the confidence that comes from decades of experience in high-stakes situations. She had testified in courtrooms where the outcome mattered tremendously. She had faced hostile witnesses and aggressive attorneys. This was television, but it was still just an exchange of words. She could handle it. She thought. The first questions came gently enough. The host asked her to respond to the women's allegations, to explain her side of the story. Judge Judy spoke clearly and directly, as she always did. She explained that she had no involvement whatsoever in these women's relationships with her ex-husband. She had not interfered, not manipulated, not done any of the things they claimed. She presented the timeline. She offered the evidence. She spoke about how these accusations were false and how they had damaged her reputation unjustly. Her response was logical, comprehensive, and thorough. But the host's next question came with an edge that hadn't been there before. He leaned forward slightly and asked whether her famous ability to detect deception might have actually been a tool she used to manipulate people. He suggested that her entire career had been built on reading people, understanding their weaknesses, knowing exactly what to say to get what she wanted. Was it possible, he asked, that her ex-husband simply didn't recognize he was being controlled? Judge Judy's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. She could feel the shift. The interview was no longer about discovering truth. It had become about trapping her, about finding contradictions in her statements, about building a case against her rather than understanding her perspective. As the interview continued, each question became more pointed, more accusatory, more designed to undermine her credibility. The host brought up specific incidents that the women had mentioned and asked her to explain them. He asked whether her denials were genuine or whether she was simply using her courtroom skills to manipulate the television audience the way the women claimed she had manipulated their lives. The producers backstage began exchanging nervous glances. The tension in the studio was rising like pressure in a closed container. Judge Judy remained composed, but her responses became more measured, more careful, each word chosen with precision. She was being backed into a corner by someone who had decided the narrative before she ever sat down. The audience watching at home could sense the shift. What had started as a fair hearing was transforming into something different, something more confrontational. The line between interview and interrogation began to blur. And as the minutes ticked by, it became clear that this appearance, meant to vindicate Judge Judy, was instead becoming another weapon being used against her. The setup was complete. The stage was set. Everything was in place for what would come next. The interview had been going on for 17 minutes when something unexpected happened. The host received a note from the control room. You could see it happen in real time if you watched carefully. His expression shifted for just a fraction of a second. His hand trembled slightly as he read the message. Then he looked back at the camera with an intensity that seemed different from before. He glanced at Judge Judy, and for the first time, there was uncertainty in his eyes. Something had changed. Something was about to disrupt the entire narrative that had been so carefully constructed over the past 3 weeks. We have a development, the host said slowly, his words measured and careful. Your ex-husband has just arrived at the studio. He's indicated that he would like to make a statement regarding these accusations. We had not planned for this, but given the gravity of the situation, we've decided to bring him on air. Judge Judy, are you willing to continue with him present? The studio fell into a profound silence. Judge Judy's eyes widened slightly, but she maintained her composure. She nodded. She was ready. She had been ready, actually, because she knew the truth. She knew exactly what he was going to say. The doors to the studio opened, and Judge Judy's ex-husband walked in. He was a man of medium build, with graying hair and the kind of presence that came from decades in the business world. He didn't look angry. He didn't look defensive. He looked determined. He looked like someone who had made a decision and was ready to live with the consequences of it. He shook the host's hand, acknowledged Judge Judy with a respectful nod, and sat down in a chair that had been hastily arranged between them. The tension in the studio became almost suffocating. The producers were scrambling to adjust camera angles. The audience in the studio shifted in their seats. Everyone could feel that something massive was about to happen. The host turned to him and asked the obvious question. Why are you here? What do you want to say? The ex-husband took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice was calm and steady. I'm here because I can't stay silent while the woman I was once married to is being destroyed by lies. I'm here because I know the truth, and the truth is that everything these women have said is false. Completely false. And worse, I have evidence that they coordinated these accusations deliberately. He pulled out a folder from his jacket. Inside were documents, emails, text message screenshots. He began laying them out on the table in front of him. These emails show that the 5 women communicated with each other extensively. They discussed strategy. They discussed how to present their stories for maximum media impact. They discussed what would damage Judge Judy's reputation most effectively. This wasn't organic. This wasn't individual women coming forward with genuine grievances. This was a coordinated campaign. The host leaned forward, genuinely shocked. Are you saying that these women conspired together to make these accusations? The ex-husband nodded. That's exactly what I'm saying. And I can prove it. These communications span months. They planned this. They researched Judge Judy's schedule. They coordinated the timing of their press conferences. One of them even wrote a document outlining the talking points they should all use. It's right here. He held up a piece of paper, and the camera zoomed in so viewers at home could see it. It was a detailed outline of accusations, each one carefully crafted to be devastating but difficult to disprove. It was a blueprint for destruction. Judge Judy sat motionless, watching as the evidence unfolded. Her ex-husband continued. As for my personal relationships, Judge Judy never interfered. Not once. I made my own choices about who I wanted to spend time with and who I didn't. When these relationships didn't work out, it was because of compatibility issues, not because of Judge Judy's manipulation. These women are telling a story that simply didn't happen. And their motivation is clear from these emails. They believed that if they could damage Judge Judy's reputation, they could somehow get access to resources, attention, or a settlement from her or the network. This entire thing was a con. The host sat back in his chair, visibly stunned. This was not how the interview was supposed to go. This was not part of anyone's plan except for the ex-husband's. He turned to Judge Judy and asked, "Did you know he was coming?" She shook her head. "I had no idea. But I'm not surprised. I always believed the truth would come out. I just didn't think it would happen like this." The studio audience erupted in murmurs. The producers in the control room were in complete chaos, scrambling to figure out how to proceed. The narrative that had dominated for 3 weeks had just been completely obliterated in the span of 5 minutes. The evidence was undeniable. The coordination was proven. The conspiracy was exposed. And Judge Judy, who had been portrayed as the villain, was suddenly revealed as the victim of a calculated, coordinated attack designed to destroy her. The silence that followed was deafening. The host didn't know what to say. The producers in the control room were experiencing a kind of collective shock. The audience in the studio sat frozen, processing what they had just witnessed. In the span of a single television segment, everything had changed. The narrative that had dominated social media, cable news, and water cooler conversations for 3 weeks had been completely dismantled by documented evidence. The women who had presented themselves as victims were revealed to be orchestrators of a calculated campaign. Judge Judy, who had been painted as a manipulative villain, stood vindicated and justified in her quiet confidence. The host finally gathered himself and turned to Judge Judy. "I apologize," he said, and you could hear genuine remorse in his voice. "We prepared for this interview based on the narrative these women had created. We should have done more due diligence. We should have questioned the coordination more carefully." Judge Judy responded with grace. "You did what journalists do. You reported what was being said. The important thing is that the truth is now out there. That's all I ever wanted." Her ex-husband added, "I also want to say that I should have come forward sooner. I saw this happening, I knew it was false, but I kept hoping they would just stop. I was wrong to wait this long." Judge Judy didn't deserve to go through this. Within hours, the story had taken on a completely different dimension. The same media outlets that had been running stories about Judge Judy's alleged manipulation were now running stories about the coordinated conspiracy against her. Social media, which had been a weapon used against her, became a platform for her vindication. People who had believed the initial accusations began to feel ashamed, realizing they had been manipulated just like the network had been. The hashtags changed. The sentiment shifted. But the damage that had been done couldn't simply be erased because the truth had emerged. The 5 women, seeing their conspiracy exposed, went into damage control mode. Some hired new lawyers. Some went silent completely. One attempted to claim her emails had been taken out of context. Another suggested that even if they had coordinated, their core accusations might still be true. But the evidence was too clear, too documented, too undeniable. Their credibility had been shattered completely. Where they had once appeared as sympathetic victims, they now appeared as calculated manipulators. The public opinion that had turned against Judge Judy so swiftly now turned against them with equal intensity. Judge Judy's sponsors began reaching out with apologies and offers to restore partnerships. Networks that had distanced themselves came back asking if she wanted to do exclusive interviews. Her legal team fielded calls from lawyers representing the women, exploring settlement options and damage control strategies. But Judge Judy's focus wasn't on revenge or maximizing the damage to her accusers. It was on something more important, restoring her reputation and moving forward. She gave a measured statement to the press. She acknowledged the pain this had caused her, but she also spoke about the importance of due diligence in reporting, about the responsibility we all have to verify information before accepting narratives. And about the dangers of mob mentality in the age of social media. She didn't gloat. She didn't point fingers. She simply stated facts and spoke about lessons learned. What did you think of this shocking turn of events? Were you surprised by what the ex-husband revealed? Did you believe the women's accusations from the start, or did something feel off to you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear your reaction to this dramatic moment. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. Your support means everything. Looking back at this entire episode, from the orchestrated accusations to the dramatic revelation of truth, we're left with profound lessons that extend far beyond the world of television and celebrity. This story is a mirror held up to our society, reflecting both our vulnerabilities and our capacity for redemption. It teaches us something fundamental about the nature of truth, about justice, and about what happens when powerful people weaponize deception against someone fighting to defend their integrity. The most important lesson is this: in a world saturated with information, with narratives being constantly constructed and deconstructed, the truth still matters. Judge Judy didn't win because she had the best public relations team or the slickest media strategy. She won because she had documented evidence, because she had integrity, and because she refused to back down in the face of coordinated attacks designed to destroy her. She won because she believed in the power of truth spoken plainly and directly, exactly as she had throughout her entire career. That consistency, that unwavering commitment to authenticity, proved to be her greatest strength when everything else seemed to be falling apart. This story also serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of accepting narratives without questioning them. The 5 wealthy women's conspiracy worked initially precisely because their story seemed credible, because they presented themselves with confidence and polish, because they coordinated their messaging so carefully that inconsistencies weren't immediately obvious. We believed them because we wanted to believe them, because their narrative fit patterns we had seen before, because we allowed mob mentality to override our critical thinking. Judge Judy's vindication should remind us all to pause before accepting accusations, to ask harder questions, to look for evidence rather than emotion, and to remember that truth often requires patience to emerge. But perhaps most importantly, this story teaches us about the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. Judge Judy didn't crumble. She didn't hire a team to manage her image or craft a narrative to counter theirs. She simply waited for the truth to come out, believing that it eventually would. Her ex-husband, seeing injustice, chose to speak up despite the personal cost. Together, they demonstrated that integrity isn't about being perfect or never making mistakes. It's about choosing truth over convenience, about refusing to bend your principles even when the entire world seems to be against you. What did you learn from this story? How does this change your perspective on public accusations and media narratives? What would you have done in Judge Judy's position? Share your insights in the comments section below. I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to hear your thoughts on this remarkable case of truth triumphing over deception. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is absolutely the time to join our community. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you never miss an update, and become part of a group that values truth, integrity, and meaningful storytelling. We'll see you in the next video.